Welcome to the GreenPilled Network podcast. If you're just joining us, we are building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers focused on using crypto to bring positive-sum digital systems to the world. In this podcast, we feature the people who are doing it, and we publish a season of episodes, 5 to 10 episodes every couple months. This season is impact season. How can we manifest the meme of impact equals profit? What are the most interesting experiments and ideas in impact tracking? How can we build crypto economic systems that elevate impactful builders and move from virtue signaling to crypto economic proof of virtue? These are the themes of Greenpill Impact Season 2024. One other special thing we're doing for Impact Season is allowing you to collect this episode. You can go to pods.media/greenpill to find all the episodes from this season and to start collecting. If you want to learn more, you can visit our website at greenpill.network, where you can download the GreenPilled Book for free, join the Discord, and become a member of your local greenpill.network chapter. All right, the show today is with my co-curators for Impact Season, Carl Carbone from OS Observer and Hypercerts, and Jonas from Optimism Retro PGF Round 3. In this episode, we talk about Impact Season, we talk about GG19, Gitcoin Grants 19, which happened during Impact Season, and we talk about retroactive public goods funding Round 3, which released a record amount of funding, OP-based funding for builders in the Ethereum and Optimism ecosystem. And we do a review of Impact Season, talk about this meme of impact equals profit. We talk about the summoning of Aether's Phoenix, which is sort of the Marvel Avengers style way of talking about impact equals profit. What if we could manifest this deity that connected impact equals profit across the world? And that's what the Optimism ecosystem kind of thinks of with Aether's Phoenix. And this episode was a fun one for me because I think that Carl and Jonas are some of the deepest thinkers, most skilled and best positioned people in the ecosystem to talk about the meme of impact equals profit, to review Impact Season with me, and to talk about where we are and what's next with respect to reaching this meme of impact equals profit. So in this episode, we talk about all the things Impact Season. We wrap up Impact Season. We put a bow on it. And I think it was just a really fun episode because Jonas and Carl are helping to co-curate this episode with me. And I've come to regard them as friends and colleagues in creating this movement with me. So without further ado, I give you the Impact Season wrap-up episode. Enjoy, coordination. What's up, Jonas? What's up, Carl?
Hey, Kevin. Hey, Jonas.
What's up?
What an Impact Season it has been. Carl, would love to start by talking to you. What are some of your takeaways about RPGF3, which happened during Impact Season?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since we first discussed Retro PGF. It feels like since then, a lot has happened. So number one, we got the results, which are cool, and let's discuss those. Number two, there's been a pretty nice pump in the markets. And so I think everybody's riding that wave and feeling a bit better perhaps than they were, say, September, October when the round was getting started. I think in addition, there's just been a lot of action and activity, which feels that we finally been able to move on from 2022 and all the bad stuff that happened. And there's a lot of optimism, pun partly intended. Coming out of that, the soundbite was that $100 million worth of tokens is going to these 500 projects that have contributed to the Optimism ecosystem. And so that was like a very eye-catching number, I think, for a lot of people.
Biggest ever, I think, in Web3 public goods funding.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, earlier in the year, we were talking about the goal of trying to get to $100 million in annual funding. And all of a sudden, this one round shatters that number. So that was very exciting. I think that caught a lot of people who might not have been following it closely by surprise. Going like a bit deeper into some of the things that I think anybody who looked into it would have observed is that a huge amount of funding actually just went to open source software projects. And that is not something that typically would get funded. I think people would imagine that there would be kind of a smaller cohort of projects that are getting a large amount of funding. What actually happened is that a huge number of open source software projects, everything from developer libraries to kind of core protocol research to things that are focused on onboarding new developers, they received really significant allocations. And I think the message coming out of that was that if you do good work in the ecosystem, it's going to get noticed. And that is such a powerful message to be sending. So coming out of it, I know that everybody was, immediately thinking about RetroPGF4 and what kind of impact they should be having between now and then to best set themselves up for success. I don't know. What were your impressions, Jonas?
Oh, the results. I feel like announcing the results has this nice small moment of celebration of what we're doing here, right? It creates this kind of, we had this whole wave, right, on Twitter with everybody sharing what they received. My whole timeline was made of this. So like for a day, I could really just dive in and enjoying the celebration. I think it set a very strong signal to what we're going for with RetroPGF, and that these rounds will keep on coming. I think in the aftermath of the results, we learned a lot of great things that are important to consider as we continue down this road. Carl, I know you've written a lengthy, nice blog post about this. I think a few things that people touched upon is the variance was too low. So projects that were like highly impactful, extremely impactful, didn't get like proportionally more than projects that were like medium impact. This was like a very, very clear point. Another point that people started raising, right, is why are the people that are generating sequencer revenue, which is used for RetroPGF, only getting around like 5% of the total tokens in this round? I think these were really, really cool points. Carl, maybe you want to go into also the kind of project versus individual comparison. I think this was like something where it became really clear as to some of the faults in this allocation.
So one of the main choices that you need to make is, do you want to have a pretty flat distribution? So basically any project is going to have a decent amount of confidence that they're going to get some funding, and the ceiling is pretty low and the floor is pretty high. So that's like what we call a peanut butter distribution. You basically spread things pretty evenly across the whole mix. And then there's a more traditional power law, which you see in a lot of markets, where you might have one winner that is getting 100x more than the next closest one. And I think going into it, there was probably an expectation that we were going to have more of a power law type distribution. If you look at Gitcoin rounds, if you look at even the past RetroPGF rounds, it has had much more of that shape. One of the things that happened during this round was that there was a big push in the final hours to get as many projects over the line. And there was a lot of cooperation among badge holders to try and identify projects that seem really good, but might need an extra push. At the same time, just given the sheer number of projects that were in the round, it was probably difficult for badge holders to do an initial allocation and then step back and say, actually, does this make sense? Am I really funding things proportional to the amount of impact that I had? It was just pretty labor intensive to go back in and update your ballot that way. So those are probably just a couple of things that might have contributed to it. But I think, to your point, Jonas, when people step back and look at the results, there were some things that were a little bit surprising. And the big one, of course, is that the whole engine of RetroPGF is sequencer fees. And so the projects that are generating the most sequencer fees, they probably should be getting a decent share of RetroPGF, especially if they don't have any other way of getting value capture. And so my guess would be that if you were to set out at the beginning and basically come up with some allocation saying, maybe I think 20% or 30% should go towards these types of projects, and maybe 20% should go towards education projects, and then vote according to that kind of a framework, versus let's just look at all these projects and then determine how much impact they've had and give them some tokens, you end up with a pretty different result. So that was definitely one of the things that came out of it.
Optimism, that's your impact, and here's your profit. Like straight, you get a piece of the economic pie because it's measurable and it is provably pushing the optimism L2 forward. But then when you get into a little bit more human things that aren't measurable, things like education or things like I'm building a software in the optimism ecosystem but that isn't directly connected to optimism, that's when you get into this gradient of, well, optimism is Ethereum and this is an Ethereum public good. And you start to kind of build these hypotheses of how this impact creates profit, and it becomes a little bit more of an exercise in creating a hypothesis of which you have assumptions, and that you're bridging a little bit. And so what I'd be interested in future rounds would just be like, okay, here's, like you said, here's an amount of the retro PGF round that will just go to projects that have had sequencer fees. And then here's another bucket for this type of impact. And we can kind of sort of categorize these different hypotheses in different ways. And I'd be curious to see how that'll move the data around from the data that we have in our PGF3. I don't know if you have any reactions to that, but that's where I could see it going.
100%. This feels like a nice segue to talk a bit about like the major themes that we learned in running this experiment. And I think one of them is too broad of a scope, and too many projects in this broad scope. And so this resulted in a situation where everything gets put into the same bucket, and you're trying to compare like a contribution of somebody running events to onboard new people to somebody that's like building something deep down in the stack. Right, and it creates this cognitive overload in making your allocation. And I think the interesting thing about about sequencer fees here is this was actually in the scope for RetroPGF. So it was like if you went deep into the documentation, it was outlined as one of the things to reward, one of the things that is impactful to the Optimism Collective. But it's kind of the dilemma of if everything is in scope in a single round, then kind of nothing is in scope, right? There is no focus to reward these things. And hand in hand with that came kind of the inability to measure impact well based on like a subclass of projects. And I think the big learning here is what we're getting to, and what I've kind of observed in different episodes, is different types of impact have different types of measurements. Right, and some impact is more subjective. Some impact can be measured in a much more like data-driven way currently. We in this application process, we've seen that it's been super hard to compare the impact of different projects due to the nature of like different metrics that were provided, different sources of information here. But what was very exciting, I think, was like Carl going deep on impact vectors and trying to focus on a subclass of projects and evaluating them well. Carl, do you want to maybe give a brief spiel on like what are impact vectors? What did you do there in the RetroPGF round?
Sure. Let me show impact vectors. Basic idea is that there's some direction that you want to improve in. So it could be getting more contributors to your project, or getting more contributors to work on projects in the Optimism ecosystem. It could be driving sequencer fees. It could be onboarding new users. The idea is you basically define some kind of direction of positive impact that you want to move in. And then the important thing is you're actually able to find a number of projects that are all moving that direction. And you can do some analysis about which ones are farthest ahead, which ones are having more impact relatively. So once you're able to like draw that lasso around a set of projects that are moving in the same direction, then it becomes more of a statistics problem. How do you actually want to determine what is really good, what is an average set of results, and then basically determine how you want to let that feed and reward function. And with the impact factors that we looked at in RetroPGF 3, what you actually saw was that there were some things which are pretty good predictors of popularity of a project, and then others which are much more aligned with, say, some of the impact goals that were stated in the user manual and that everybody felt they should be striving for.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you here, Carl, but I just wanted to note out that like separating the reward distribution of these public goods projects from the popularity is like a white whale. And I've been working on this for like 4 or 5 years. We call this the Keynesian beauty contest. It's where people just reward things that they recognize and are popular. And it's like a white whale to solve this. So I just want to interject that. The fact that you've pulled that thread out in the data, I think, is a major step forward.
I don't think we can solve it just yet, because obviously products are popular for a reason. And what you certainly saw here is that many of the most popular projects are ones that a lot of developers who were represented as badge holders or that were really big pillars in the Ethereum ecosystem were contributing to. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but the important thing is that through these impact factors, you can actually get signals about what products are having more impact in a particular domain. And so even if you're only using them to say, great, let's find the 10 most impactful projects that are driving sequencer fees, and let's compare that with the ones that have been around the longest. Maybe I combine those two data sets and say, okay, these are the ones that I want to make sure get an outsized reward because they've been around and they're contributing a lot to sequencer fees. One of the things that I want to caution against is having these impact vectors or any kind of objective function basically determine the allocation itself. So you don't want to, you probably don't want to have just one vector, and through that you're able to predict exactly how much reward you're going to get, because then it becomes quite easy to game, especially if it's not a very good indicator, like stars or downloads. Those are ones that if you really want to game it, there's a pretty straightforward way to do that. And obviously, we don't want to create that kind of incentive.
And coming back to the example of like sequencer fee generation, this is something we can measure very well today, right? While other contributions, it's really hard to measure impact. And I think the big, or one of the big takeaways, at least for me personally, for this round is if we split up the scope to be more specific, run different rounds, we can adjust the round design to the kind of state of how well we can measure impact within this scope. And I think this is really the step forward to not looking at this as like one big pile of problems, but like separating the problems out into individual areas. And then we can, and I think this is the biggest interesting shift, go away from like popularity beauty contest vibes. Even though I would say like the results were like very agreeable in round 3, at least for like the top 100, move away from this and move to something that feels like measured impact based on kind of the values that the voters in the system are expressing, right? So we move away from like reviewing individual projects out of a big pool of projects, but we get voters to express what do they think is impactful and what should be rewarded and how.
That's a good conversation to have, because once you've decided roughly how much you want, then the next question is, okay, which projects do you put in each of these buckets? And then you can do the selection among the projects or figure out what types of impact matter most.
My immediate reaction is, oh no, more governance where we have to decide how much goes in each bucket. But I think it's going to make the badge holder's job a lot easier. So it'd be an interesting thing to try.
I think what has been or what I was super impressed in this round is the sheer commitment of badge holders to try to do this job well. I think we've run surveys around like how many hours spent. We've seen a lot of engagement. We've seen endless blog posts. The whole kind of discussion and conversation around round 3 is so broad that this retrospective blog post, which we're writing on the round, is like an endless long paper on all the different important topics that were covered. And really the trick here is we can make the voters' life much easier. And really focus the discussion on something that's meaningful. I think, like if you see the outrage on Twitter around like this project received something or this project received something, kind of picking and choosing out of a pool of 500, reflects the nature of the voting of individual reviews. The conversation, as you're saying, Carl, should be much more about like, is this the right distribution that we want? Did this reward the types of impact that we want to see? This is where we want to move things to. I think a thing that this round did very well compared to like previous rounds. I think taking a small loop down memory lane, 6 months before round 3, we ran the second round of RetroPGF, and it was literally voting on 195 projects via one long form that didn't have that didn't sum up your votes or that didn't like check that your inputs are correct. I think Owocki, you went through this experience, so you can probably testament to like how much of a manual like MVP thing this was that we shipped. And what I really loved about round 3, what we saw is like this whole collection of builders coming in, building different tooling for the voters, and it felt almost like a hackathon vibe. So we had like I think in total like 6 different teams building different components here. And one cool thing is that we can now take this whole range of tools that we've built and make it available to everyone. And so one of these is, for instance, Owocki, what we collaborated on with West that you're now shipping as easy RetroPGF. Maybe you want to touch on that a bit.
One of the things that I'm really interested in is democratizing the tools that are used on the frontier by the people who are innovating new mechanisms to fund public goods. Obviously, Gitcoin's known for quadratic funding. retroactive public goods funding. I think Optimism is pioneering, and one of the things that we want to do is build a movement of more public goods funding and funding for people who are creating impact, and that creates a groundswell of cultural and technological artifacts that support the movement, and the momentum sort of compounds. And I saw an opportunity about halfway through the Optimism RPGF round, after we had bid on this RFP from the Optimism Foundation to build the voting software, one part of the voting software for Optimism RPG Retro PGF 3, and I came to you and a few others and floated this idea of, what if we white labeled it and we made it so that anyone could deploy it and run their own Retro PGF round, and everyone seemed open to it and seemed to see it as an opportunity to spread more retro PGF throughout the ecosystem. And also, I think, there's maybe an opportunity here where, if this becomes a public good for the ecosystem, then if people PR new goodies into it, then that comes back to Optimism if you decide to use Easy Retro PGF for one of the future Optimism rounds. And so there's kind of a positive feedback loop here if we get it right. Anyway, if anyone out there is listening and wants to run Retro PGF for their ecosystem, easyretropgf.xyz is the tool. You can deploy it on your own. You don't need me to do it. You can just fork it and deploy it on Versal. But if you want to kind of do it with training wheels, then we're going to be offering a training program that teaches people how to think about Retro PGF and how to design a program Optimism style. And then we're going to have a cohort of people in March and April that are actually going to be running Retro PGF rounds that are Optimism style Retro PGF rounds. So it's a great joy for me to be at the frontier and be shipping the insights and software from the frontier back to the people who are busy with their day jobs of building their own ecosystem, so that we can give you the train tracks and the train car to run Retro PGF, and you can just deploy it in your ecosystem. So that's kind of 2 minutes on what we did. I'm curious if you have any reactions to that, Jonas.
Love to see it. I know, for instance, the Macy team is toying with like Easy Retro PGF to see how we could have more, or how we could do like big improvements to the voting infrastructure that we're using. So these are the kinds of loops that are super fascinating to observe. I think the big theme here in round 3, and just touching upon the nature of how we run Retro PGF, is that we're truly trying to run this as a continuous experiment. And I think the background on this is, we run these rounds, we learn a lot from them, we write up these learnings and observations based on the feedback that we've received from the voters. And then based on this, we're making new prioritizations of what we want to change in the next round. I think this has been like my biggest, I think at the last conference we were at in Istanbul, DevConnect, one of my biggest themes here was we need to get better at like radical open learning. We need to move away from an environment that feels like everybody's constantly celebrating themselves and the greatness of their idea, but never sharing what goes wrong, towards something where we are truly trying to learn together and iterate towards summoning Ether's Phoenix, right? And so I think we've seen a lot of valuable feedback in this round, both from voters as well as the broader community. Sometimes this goes into like territory that feels like very pessimistic, right? It's trying to like discredit the nature of the program itself. But I think the nice message to send out here, right, is like, if the Optimism Collective can make these mistakes and learn from them, anybody that's running these experiments can do the same. So I think if we do one thing in this round, which is set the example to ship and iterate and take this very seriously, and others can learn from that, I think we achieved a lot, and we're going to see many more people run experiments that are like very ambitious and audacious, and less concerns about getting it right, and being fine with seeing a bit of the heat go around what you do.
One thing that is definitely happening right now, and maybe you've seen some of this as well, is that projects that were recipients are now thinking, how can we do our own version of Retro PGF? So maybe they'll be using easy retro BGF, maybe they will just find a way to look at their own contributors and do their own form of that. But I think that the idea, like the meme of retro BGF, has spread everywhere. And even in Web 2 ecosystems, they're thinking, like we could probably do this as well.
There's Jonas and I have talked a little bit about this, but this idea of public goods funding, where it kind of starts to resemble like a series of veins or like aqueducts, where you have like a major stream of funding, picturing in the top left, and then it comes down and it breaks into 3 or 4 streams of funding, and then those break into 3 or 4 streams of funding each. I'm really interested in this idea that people who could take their retro PGF rewards and then distribute them further in their communities from there using easy retro PGF or Gitcoin Grant Stack, or you could do it in Airtable if you wanted to. And what I think the value compounds there, because each time one of these funds is distributed, it builds the meme of public goods funding and impact equals profit. But I also think that there's some valuable stuff here in that there's this principle of subsidiarity where each community kind of knows which contributor within that community is pulling the most weight. And so you want to have that locality of distributing the funds locally according to who's having the most weight. And if at the top level you tried to solve that all at once, you would just overwhelm everyone. And so what I'm really interested in doing is breaking down the problem in such a way that we can have bottoms up signals of what's providing value, and also more like top down, bigger aqueducts of funding. And that's where I think it gets really interesting when this movement compounds at scale.
A good example of this might have been in the retro PGF round, we saw a lot of Farcaster related infrastructure apply. Obviously, the Farcaster community is probably way more qualified to judge which piece of Farcaster infrastructure has generated how much impact. They know this much better than the badge holders, the Optimism citizens, who are not necessarily users of Farcaster. And so, if we can create a system, as you said, Owocki, where we allow for bottom up curation, that solves this problem. And I think a lot of cool initiatives, as you said, I've heard from the POC team, they're looking to run around. Just saw today the WACME team starting their own stream via drips to their dependencies. And so it will be really great to see if this gets us to run more experiments.
Yeah, just to add on the example of drips and WAGME, drips is also funding WAGME. So there's a co-funding stream where they're both dripping to each other.
One thing I would love to touch on is regenlearnings.xyz. To go back to your point about learning in public, Jonas, I think that there's a huge opportunity for people who are writing these programs or involved in these programs to share their learnings publicly. And together that knowledge sort of compounds the momentum across the ecosystem. And so Carl and I launched this thing called regenlearnings.xyz, which is basically a way for us to bring other data scientists, program designers, a priori theorists to the table and just ship learnings from their ecosystems to each other. And so if you go to regenlearnings.xyz, we're starting to just list out the learnings that different ecosystems have published. Maybe once we have enough of them, we'll throw them into an LLM and you'll just be able to ask the LLM, what's the difference between RPGF3 and RPGF7 one day. But the main thing I'm looking for also is to connect people who have similar skill sets to each other. So like data scientists, we have this data scientist in the Gitcoin ecosystem named Umar. Umar, what's up if you're listening? And like Umar's working out of this data source that we've built in the Gitcoin ecosystem, and Carl's working in this data source called OS Observer, and we could join those together. And they can both draw from each other. And then I think there's also an opportunity for data scientists to get connected to program designers, and they have complementary skill sets and they can provide value back and forth to each other. So another result of Impact Season has just been democratizing the kind of conversations that I guess the three of us would have really in our DMs into Regen Learning, so that more people can be at the table and be adding value to learning. And it's just this dopamine rush when you ship a post. Like Carl, you and I have shipped maybe 2 or 3 Medium posts together, and just democratizing that dopamine rush of having a learning and having an insight and giving it out to the ecosystem is part of what we're doing there. Anything to add there, Carl?
100%. Nothing really to add. One thing that I will say that came up in one of our other podcasts is the idea that weaving is a public good, the idea of being able to look across a landscape, identify who's doing what, bring them together and help them find meaning. Right now, we're at the state where most of this is pretty hard to decipher unless you're spending 100% of your time in this space. So just knowing which Telegram chats to be in, which people to pay attention to, and so on is quite difficult. And so I have a lot of respect for the people that are able to look out there and say, you seem to be doing this. Here's a person who can help you, and weave those together. It's a really undervalued but incredibly essential part of bringing these pieces together.
Yeah. And then, I'll just admit, while we're doing this podcast in front of thousands of people, just hand to the sky, it's also a part of out of laziness for me, where if I don't want to do something, I can just kick it out to the group and they do it for me. Like that Sankey diagram that I dropped at Zuzalu, I'm not going to maintain that anymore. Regen Learnings, you guys can maintain that, and I'll drop you some tokens in exchange for doing it.
I mean, you see it working. Actually, there's a person who just popped out of the woodwork and said, actually, I have an idea for what to do, and showed me a V1 last night. So 12 hours after you put that out there, there's already someone working on it.
All right. That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think that's just like one of the amazing things about this space is that you don't discover until you build in public and you learn in public, is how many people are out there that share the same mission as you and really want to see it happen. And you don't realize until you're not afraid of the criticism of working in public, and you get yourself out there, do you find those people? And so pulling more people out of the woodwork to build this movement is kind of the number one thing I'm trying to do. It starts off as a single player game, but then it becomes a multiplayer game real quick.
I think there's a really interesting shift here. I think you touched up on it, Carl. Like data science is becoming super important to run these rounds, just to evaluate impact. We're seeing many more experiments. And so I think these types of initiatives really put special emphasis on actually shipping something and learning from it, or running simulations to understand something better, and moving us out of the space that feels highly theoretical and like ideas driven. And I think if we can get to a culture that celebrates the companies, collectives, individuals that ship actual experiments, that ship infrastructure that is used, and we celebrate that, and that becomes kind of a rallying cry, and we celebrate the learnings and the failures. That will get us to a very different state than celebrating the ideas and the great insights and like the kind of beautiful theory that we're outlining here. You guys to kind of move away from round 3 and actually to the wrap up of this season, you guys talked to a lot of builders, talked to a lot of people that actually ship different public goods funding experiments. So I think it's super interesting to learn about all the conversations that you had. What were like the common themes that struck you, that like stayed with you?
Go for it, Owocki.
Yeah. Well, okay. So Impact Season this is one of the last episodes of Impact Season. And part of the idea was to batch 10 episodes together. The idea being, instead of, picking a bunch of different things, hopping from civil resistance to climate to Portland localism, that just like having a season just about impact and trying to approach this meme of impact equals profit, the value would compound by doing those together. And I definitely feel like we at least paint a picture in my mind of how we might do a better job of just measuring impact. And that helps us have a more data-driven path to impact equals profit. So, Carl, the work that you're doing with OS Observer, we talked to Raymond and Carl about OS Observer. I think that was really great. I think talking to the Ethereum attestation service guy, Steve, made me feel like there's a protocol where we could just all get our attestations of impact out there and then start to evaluate them. And we also talked to Eugene and Mishal, who were doing sort of a survey of different grants programs out there, and Joe and Feems from Plurality Labs, who are running the grants program for Arbitrum. And I think that like what I'm starting to visualize in my mind's eye is a double or a triple-sided market where there's people who are producing impact, and then there's people who are rewarding impact. And then there's this third category that we're just starting to bootstrap called the impact evaluator, that is connecting what has impact to profit there. And so it's the bootstrapping of that triple-sided marketplace that's really in my mind's eye when I think about all of the stuff that we discovered in impact season for GreenPill. I'd be curious for the same question to Carl, though. Carl, what do you think your major themes are from impact season? And thanks for being my ride or die co-host for the last 10 episodes. That's been fun.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. I think a few themes to build on what you said just then. Number one, I think we've gotten to the point where people realize that the meta is to cooperate as opposed to try and invent a better standard or invent a fancier protocol. Snap for that. And so you heard that across all of the guests. They basically said, oh, we've noticed that someone is doing this, and therefore we're going to find a way to coordinate with them. We're going to find a way to either work directly on top of their protocol, like the discussions that are happening now between Ethereum attestation service and hypercerts, and then in communities that have actually tried using some of these tools and in some cases been a little bit frustrated, saying, we want to do this, but we didn't quite get what we wanted to. They aren't going out and saying, actually, that inspires me to build something completely different or give up. They actually want to go back in and try and fix it and design a better experiment the next time around. So I think that that cooperation that you're seeing, which is so rare, let's just be honest, that is not typically how the world works. And that is the default culture that we've created here is so special. That was true across all the guests. And then even you step back and you look back at the ecosystem and how other products are coordinating, and you see that everywhere. So I think that's amazing. One thing that I really respect about what both Juan from Protocol Labs said and Feems and Joe from Plurality Labs, the two PLs, is that you just need to take more shots on goal. This stuff is hard. You need to be able to think really long term and be able to deploy capital at pretty early stages in the process and just place a lot of bets, because if this stuff were easy, we'd already know how to do it, and it isn't. And so that's why we need to have as many smart people, talented people trying to work it out. I guess the last thing that I think is just so clear now, it was probably clear before, but since RetroPGF and all the things that have happened coming out of that, I think the idea that you're going to fund your dependencies, that you're going to figure out what is the weakest link in your value chain and ensure that that is sustainably funded is something that everybody is talking about right now. And you see it in the Drips example, you see it in the WAGMI example, and I imagine thousands of other experiments that are happening right now. So that is exceptional. The fact that that has now become the default thing that you do in a very short period of time is really cool. And when we talk with the people from the Chaos community, which is a set of people that have been trying to solve many of these problems around impact measurement, for decades at this point, their eyes lit up when they heard that these were some of the experiments that were happening in the Ethereum ecosystem. They said, wow, you're actually able to identify these things, and there's a value in funding them properly, making them sustainable. That's incredible. So I think that we actually might be at a point when we're able to thaw some of the relations between the Web3 and the Web2 ecosystems. And if that is the export that we have from all of this, that we're able to fund public goods sustainably across both Web 2 and Web 3, that would be exceptional.
Yeah, there's an insight that comes from Vitalik. When we had him on GreenPill, I think it would have been November or something like that. But we were talking about what excites him that he feels like is not worked on enough. And it was basically getting all of the impact attestations out there in a common standard so that people can build on top of them. And then he was also start with open source software, because right now most open source software developers don't know about crypto or just have a fuzzy awareness and think it's a scam, because let's be honest, a lot of crypto is a scam. And if we can start to fund open source software, not only is that hardening the digital infrastructure, but it's actually a very influential and important set of people to get involved in the crypto ecosystem. And so this is actually just to play it forward 6 months. That's why we did impact season, was because we wanted to talk about all the different ways that we were measuring impact and see how open source has been funded. So, Vitalik, thank you for dropping that thought in my brain. And, thank you to Jonas and Carl for helping me to execute this season so far. But I think that was just such a profound insight, and I'm hopeful that by measuring and covering the impact attestations happening in the ecosystem, that we can play a small role in accelerating the movement, and also creating sort of synapses between the neurons. The different people who are building in this movement now know more about each other because of the podcasts that we've done. And I would never take credit for anyone's work in the ecosystem, but I think we can play a small role in accelerating it forward by covering it and in helping to build the movement. So really excited about this being a multiplayer game that the whole ecosystem is working on, and we can just kind of flash a light on it so that more people see it.
Definitely strongly resonate with a lot of points that you guys made, especially like running many experiments, because this is too hard and you need like many iteration cycles to get it right. I think on the emergence of like more dependency funding, what I find really interesting is we're getting to something where collaboration and funding public goods feels like the winning strategy. It feels like the way to advance whatever you're doing, to advance your ecosystem, to advance the protocol that you're building, etc. And this to me is like an interesting theme, as it feels like very different than something that resonates more in kind of altruistic nature, in which you might fund your dependencies or fund public goods because you're just a nice person or you're a nice project. And what I've heard from different companies, projects, DAOs, is that it's been hard to get sign off on spending to fund dependencies or fund public goods, and often these things get like booked as like marketing expenses, because that seems to be like the core reason to do it, just to like set the vibe, right? Like show that you're value aligned. And now with this whole theme that you're describing of impact measurement, we can get to something where this becomes the winning strategy, and we can actually demonstrate, right? Like if you run this retro PGF round, you will see I think this is actually like the golden thing to get to. If you run this retro PGF round, if you run this quadratic funding round, etc., you will see an increase of the production of goods and services that you need that advance your cause. I think this is just a theme that will get us, like, that will speed up this whole development cycle, because we will see much more kind of self-interest align with the interests of the public kind of vibe.
Another thing that happened since when we recorded the first episode and towards the end is that there's been a lot of discussion about client diversity in Ethereum. And so if you look at the results of Retro PGF 3, one of the top funded projects was Geth. And since then, there's been a pretty strong movement to ensure that we don't give too much concentrated, execution. We don't have too much execution running through Geth, because we want to ensure that we're fault resistant. If there's any kind of a bug, that we don't have some catastrophic failure. And so, if we were to look purely at some of the metrics that we use going into the round, which is that you want to reward projects that have been stable, that have been secure, that have been able to be stable infrastructure for the ecosystem. And now what we know about actually wanting to fund as many alternative clients as possible, I think that you would actually see potentially a different allocation coming out of that. And so one of the things that's really important here is that you have more than one way of looking at the impact of something.
One of the things that Jonas, I'm really excited about is moving from this perception that public goods is this granola, hippy dippy, hacky sack thing that we do out of altruism. And, by the way, I plead guilty to all those things. I live in Boulder, Colorado. I love ultimate Frisbee and hacky sacks. But it being a sustainable competitive advantage for your ecosystem. Okay. So the old way of thinking about public goods funding is that, that's just that thing that those hippies do. And the new way of thinking about it is, wait, Web3 is a place where there are repeat interactions and possible win-wins among many smart participants. And these ecosystems are all competing for developers and competing for talent to come work in them. And the ecosystem that rewards the people who are having impact and captures the hearts and minds of these builders is going to be the one that wins. All of this stuff is betting huge on this idea of impact equals profit is a sustainable competitive advantage for these ecosystems. And so I think that moving from, hey, you do this for altruism, you do this for marketing, to, hey, you do this because it gives our ecosystem a sustainable competitive advantage is one of the reasons why public goods funding is going to proliferate as one of the new metas, most effective tactic availables for ecosystem building available out there. And Gitcoin's goal is kind of to be the one that's offering the software and services and the best practices to these other ecosystems out there to make it happen. So hit me up if you're running an ecosystem and you want to figure out how to do public goods funding. And by the way, when we ask for budget, we probably won't call it public goods funding. We'll probably call it like an ecosystem incentivization program. And I'll point to Carl's blog posts to be like, no, we have data on how this creates more impact in your ecosystem. So it's just a little bit of how you package it that I think that we're going to iterate a little bit on. But the tech is there and the movement is there. It's just a matter of packaging it so it doesn't look like this granola hippy dippy thing anymore.
Throwing out a loose question here. What are some of the upcoming experiments, things people are working on that you're the most excited about? Like, especially, like, do you have like specific things, like lower hanging fruit? For instance, we talked about measuring the impact of open source software as kind of the place to start. Are there examples like this that you found in running this season where it feels like this could happen in the next 3 months, 6 months?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of this stuff is already happening. And I'll just say that every time Carl publishes a new blog post, it's like Christmas morning for me because I love data porn. So maybe, Carl, I'll pass it along to you to give a first answer. And then I've got another few things I want to mention.
Cool. I think the work on the data stuff, I feel that's almost inevitable at this point. The real goal that we have is trying to democratize access. So as you heard from Raymond, we care a lot about not just having open source code and open data, but open infrastructure so that anybody can come in, access data that's been cleaned and indexed, and just get right to trying to find meaning from it and making beautiful data visualizations from it. So that is like really important in making sure that we have a lot of people that are offering impact vectors and meaning as we do more and more of this type of experimentation. The other thing that I really want to see, and I've spoken to a few builders that are working on this and would love to support in any way that I can, is trying to bring things that are right now not digitally native. It could be attending an event. It could be receiving some kind of education or onboarding work. I'd love to see ways of capturing that either through attestations or other forms that allows them to slot in and start being able to measure that impact as well. The third thing that I'll say, and I don't exactly know what's going to happen here, but I think that we're going to start finding non-skeuomorphic ways of funding public goods. And right now we are so used to this like shopping cart view of all of the public goods that exist in your ecosystem and choosing which ones you like and which ones you want to fund. I have a feeling that next 3 to 6 months, we're going to see some pretty innovative new ways of thinking about identifying these are the things that you value and streaming funding to them.
Plus one to everything that Carl said. One of the things that I'm really interested in, and it kind of fits right into Carl's theme of non-skeuomorphic funding tools. And just to remind the audience what that means, skeuomorphic is like something that you would see in the old world. Non-skeuomorphic is over the horizon of what's possible. So for example, like from the perspective of someone in the 1980s, Google, a search engine, is non-skeuomorphic because it's a way of traversing information that couldn't have existed before the internet. So when we say we're looking for the non-skeuomorphic public goods funding tools, we're looking for the things that wouldn't be possible without cryptographic keys in everyone's hands and blockchains and stuff like that. Anyway, so the non-skeuomorphic thing that I'm really excited about is building a web of trust of impact attestations. And what I think is powerful about that is that we solved with PageRank, which is a web of trust style system in which links vote for each other, which websites are valuable and informative. And Google has resisted all sorts of spam attacks and link spam attacks by using a web of trust-based system. Imagine we have a world in which we're all attesting to each other's impact. And the fact that I attested to Carl, who attested to Jonas, who attested to, I got to pick on someone, Umar from the Gitcoin ecosystem, that builds a web of trust where each vote enforces that specific edge, and it becomes very hard to spam and attack the system because you have to co-opt one of the people in the system in order to attack the system. And what does it look like when we have a web of trust where every Gitcoin grant, every Optimism RPGF grant has a bunch of attestations from influential people in the ecosystem, and we've got this web of trust that has attestations on the attestations? I think that we're going to really be able to build a decentralized view of what has impact. And what I think is going to be beautiful is that the data will be open source. With Google and PageRank, only Google has the data of the link in the web of trust, and Google comes up with one PageRank. But we're going to be able to have Carl's impact rank and Kevin's impact rank, and they're going to be on different impact vectors. And so that's the non-skeuomorphic thing that I think is right over the horizon that I'm really excited to see. I think it's going to be on Ethereum attestation service and maybe a little bit of hypercerts in there also. But I think that's going to be the deeply powerful non-skeuomorphic primitive that we'll see birthed in 2024, and hopefully we'll start to have impact in, I don't know, RPGF 5 and Gitcoin Grants 23 is what I'm here for. But Jonas, I'll turn the question back on you. What are you really excited about?
Exactly that. That 1,000%. I think one of the interesting things here is we don't need to reinvent or collect a lot of new signals. People are already in their daily interactions submitting a bunch of signals. So an example of this, if we want to measure the impact of Carl's blog posts, most of them he publishes on Mirror with an NFT mint, right? Together with taking a social graph like Forecaster, we could get at least some loose understanding of like, these are the people that are real humans. They're like users on Optimism, and they really like Carl's blog posts, and come up with measurements like this. So we don't even, it's not purely about introducing new signals. It's using what we already have. And the kind of big theme this goes into, what you're talking about, like Web of Trust, is one side of this, it's kind of like all the same problem. The airdrop problem is the same as the RetroPGF problem. The Sybil resistance problem is the same as the RetroPGF problem. It's all this like single class, like it's all like the same problem set that we're trying to tackle here. And the big shift from a user perspective is currently we think of voting systems, and especially public goods funding, as this distinct in time process where users express their preferences, right? In a Gitcoin system, that is like quadratic funding. You go in, you express what projects you find valuable to the ecosystem. And you do this during a round, during kind of this distinct period in time where you vote. What if we change this towards something where users are constantly expressing their preferences in their interactions within this ecosystem, in minting Mirror NFTs, in using a library to develop their contracts, etc. And the voting actually becomes the metagame of discussing what are the types of impact that we find valuable and how should we reward them. And this is not a new idea, right? I think this is kind of the case if you go on Forecaster or Twitter and you like posts, right? Or you spend a lot of time reading a post, the algorithm already takes this into account. And once we are there, we can actually probably get rid of distinct voting rounds, and it can become one continuous stream of measuring and rewarding impact. And I think this is kind of the North Star that we want to get to. And the simple start is, I think, where we will evolve in terms of RetroPGF is we have a class of impact that we already have signals for, right? And the challenge becomes more of like, what do we do with these signals? How do we identify the impact vectors that we want to have? How can users express kind of their beliefs that they only want to reward open source projects, or they don't want to reward VC-funded projects? And then the next step is, and then from there, we can go into like designing these rounds to fit kind of the areas that we're looking into. So based on your question, Kevin, this is exactly the thing I'm most excited about. Take us out of like subjective review phase, even though we will be there for a much longer time for a lot of contributions, and try to push us towards Web of Trust, impact measurement, allowing voters to actually express their voting strategy properly, not only by like making one-off judgments on projects.
Yeah, plus one. I really think that there's just going to be this triple-sided market between people who are creating impact, supply, and then people who are rewarding impact, Gitcoin Grants, RetroPGF, but also Giveth Clear Fund and a bunch of other stuff, hypercerts. And then there's these impact evaluators. And everything I think that we're doing is bootstrapping that triple-sided market right here. We're building like almost like a flywheel that transfers energy between these three things. And there's a network effect that's going to be built as these things are built. So I don't know, we'll have to do an impact season in 2025 and see what has played out and what hasn't. But that's the view from 2024, and I'm really excited for it. I'm just realizing that we are 1 minute over, and the podcast host to me is like, "Holy smokes, we got to land this plane." You can tell this is going to be this is a good episode because we just went and I lost track of time, which rarely happens. It's against all of my podcast hosting instincts. Maybe we could have final wrap up thoughts, and Carl, I'll go to you first.
Great. So let me just say, first off, thank you. It's been such a fun journey, Owocki and Jonas, to go through over the past couple of months doing the series. A lot of people have come out of the woodwork saying that these discussions have impacted them a lot. I think they see that we're actually building some new bridges between the legacy world and Web3 through this three-sided marketplace that we think should exist. I think there's a lot of people who want to be more politically active, who want to govern over things, but they feel left out of the process. And I think that what RetroPGF has done is given people an amount of control where they can dial that up if they so choose to, or they can just observe and have some trust that the system is working. So I think it's this really powerful experiment and example. And I want to share that with as many people as possible so they can see that these are some of the things that people are working really hard at. I do worry. One thing I worry about is if we get too good at it, then it becomes a bit less fun because we've solved all of the hard subjective problems that require people to fight it out on Twitter or in Telegram chats. But I think that's still a long way off. So I'm really optimistic about what we're going to be able to do. I'm looking forward to RetroPGF 4, 5, 6, 7, and all of the learnings that are going to be synthesized into the broader Ethereum ecosystem.
Jonas, same question to you. Any wrap-up thoughts?
A fun anecdote I throw out from time to time is if we announce the RetroPGF results and everybody's like over the moon about their allocation, that means something is going wrong, which is they should feel like they deserve this. And the default should probably be to be like, this is the right amount or this is too little. And it shouldn't feel like handing out just like handing out appreciation. So to your point, Carl, if we get too good, I think the positive vibes probably won't be as strong as they currently are. I think in aggregate, we're really moving into, I feel like we're really accelerating the speed of running these experiments. We're bringing in many more talented people into this problem set. And we see a lot of collaboration happening between all kinds of different teams and trying to run these experiments together. And I think the more we can get to fast iteration cycles and radical learning and building in the open, the faster we will summon Ether's Phoenix and we can demonstrate that this is the winning strategy and it's not something we just do because we're nice people. And I think it's been super fun to see this podcast take on this theme, get all the builders involved, and kind of spread this to a wider audience.
How about you, Owocki? What are your takeaways?
+1 to each thing that each of you said. I think for me, it's just like a certain amount of gratitude to just be here and to be observing it all and to democratize access to the conversations that I have because I founded Gitcoin. Like part of the goal with Greenpill has always been, I get access to really smart people from like Daniel Schmachtenberger to Vitalik Buterin and just like to access their brains and to shine a light on the best stuff in the ecosystem. So I'm just have gratitude for being here and gratitude to everyone for showing up and building this movement, because I think it's maybe one of the most important things we could be doing with our waking moments and with our mental cycles. So I'll just end on that point of gratitude. All right, y'all. Well, this has been fun. I think I'll probably twist your arm to come back and co-host an impact season in 2025 or 2026. So I'll plant that thought in your minds now. And thanks for helping me co-curate this season. I will see you on the Ethernets.
All right. See ya.
Peace. Thanks for listening to the GreenPilled.network podcast. We are featuring the people who build A Coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers using crypto to bring positive-sum digital systems to the world. If you value our work, you can collect this episode at pods.media/greenpill. Please also remember to like, subscribe, rate and review this episode. It helps us to build this crypto economic movement for regenerative purposes. I hope you enjoyed the episode with Jonas and Carl. I hope you enjoyed Impact Season. Let me know if you did or did not. Give me feedback on this season. We will probably be doing more seasons like this in the future about various themes out there, just to cast some of the different ideas for seasons that I want to do out there. We are going to maybe do a season on different regen experiments in different regen niches out there. We're going to be doing a season maybe on Gitcoin 2.0. I would love to do one on regen network states, and maybe we'll do an impact season 2025 or 2026. So give me feedback on impact season. This is the first season that we've done, and I'd love to hear from you. All right, peace and love. See you next time.